And pleased to welcome our next guest to the conversation. That is former U.S. Congressman representing the 3rd District in the state of Mississippi, Greg Harper. He is coming to us from his library. A lot of books. How many of those have you actually read that are behind you? It looks like some legal code back there.
No, I'm colored in every one of them. So I mean, there's
beautiful.
And Lance reminded me that just above my head on the green set right there, that's your autobiography going right there. It's only about 12 volumes so far.
Yeah, the title of the book is "I Want to Talk About Me."
Good to
Greg,
see you,
really
Richard.
appreciate your time. Always a pleasure to visit with you. This is a very interesting, fascinating, for some scary time in the United States, and it has a lot to do with where we are economically and what's going on. This tariff conversation is it's one that is changing not by the day, but by the hour, maybe even by the minute. Let's start big picture with tariffs. To me, there's lots and lots of confusion about what all of this conversation is about, why it is that President Trump is using tariffs, what his overall goal is. It from your perspective, from someone who has sat in that Capitol and has debated what's best economically for the United States, who recognizes the significant issue that we've got with the debt, with the national deficit. Where are we right now from your perspective?
Richard, I can't keep up with all of it. It's really dizzying when you see what's going on. And look, to his credit, he's only doing what he said he was going to do. But when we talk about tariffs, I mean, simply just a tax on imports. He's really the first president I remember, for me as an adult, that took a serious look country by country at what's going on with our trade relations. And let's look, even if you're a big critic of President Trump, and he has many out there that just want to rant and rave and offer no solution, but only criticism. If you look at it, we've been much, much more generous to other countries than they've been to us, and that's just a fact. So it's not just tariffs; it's also trade restrictions and other barriers that are in there that maybe don't have a figure like a tariff might have. But remember, when he started this, they said the world would end. We'd go into the big stock market crash, and it did take a dive for a little bit. But how do you then turn around and say what happened yesterday? And I'll just give one example. If you remember when in Trump's first term, the folks, primarily State Department related folks, said if you move the embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, there will be another world war. Nothing happened, except he did what every president said they would do in their terms and never did. And so he's not afraid to take on a chance. And I just think that, I mean, we scratch our heads every day because he's doing things that the so-called experts would say maybe you shouldn't be doing that. But look at where we are. Not only has he now got really almost every country coming to the table now to talk, saying we want a deal. Brilliantly, he sort of isolated China, communist China, in the process. So this is something that you just have to kind of smile at what he's doing, because look, China's been at war with us. We just don't know it. And this is a way that we can sort of isolate them and take that advantage. So there's going to be a lot of things that are going to happen. He not only isolating communist China, but he's got to figure out a way too that he protects Taiwan. The last thing you want to do with Taiwan is require them to be pushed towards communist China. And so there's so many plots and subplots going on that it's really difficult to look at.
I want to go down the China road with you in just a second, but let's press pause on that, because you said something. You referenced the stock market, and to me there is disingenuousness on both sides of the aisle as it pertains to the stock market. You had Democrats, as the stock market was falling 20%, going, "See, this is blowing up the market, and we're killing people's retirement funds," but they didn't want to recognize necessarily yesterday when the stock market had a huge rebound. And then on the other side of things, You had Republicans, when the stock market was falling, saying, oh, there's nothing to see here. It's part of the process. It'll be okay. Don't worry about it. But then wanted to champion yesterday the bounce back of the stock market. Is that, am I onto something there in terms of like, we're just using it for political rhetoric, and perhaps maybe the stock market shouldn't be the only barometer of success or failure in this larger conversation?
Well, you certainly want to claim credit for everything that's successful, right? I mean, that's human nature.
Sure.
I think that's part of it.
And you want to point blame for anything that looks like it might be a failure of the opposite side.
Right. And look, and most people that and I'm certainly no financial expert, but people that invest in the stock market, mutual funds, whatever, they do it typically for the long term. There are those they're trading daily and doing things that's a lot more, I'm sure, disruptive for them in that process. But remember, we're carrying this thing called debt, a lot of debt, and it has to be financed. And my understanding is when there's disruption in the stock market, that kind of forces investments into the bond market, which is much better when you come into, say, this summer or later in the year, where you have to refinance some of that debt that we're carrying. So he may be smarter than all of us when all is said and done. So I think that we'll see how it plays out. But I think you just can't worry about the stock market up and down. We know it's going to go up and down. But those on Wall Street would not want to disrupt trade. They don't want to have a trade war. Well, we've got to do what's for the best interest of the country. And there will, and look, you know how it is in the media. If you're against a position, then you're going to show these little vignettes, these little stories about how it hurts this person or it hurts this one thing. But overall, for the country, I think we're in a it's an interesting ride, I'll have to say, but I do believe we're going to be okay at the end of the day. But look, I remember when Trump came in, I don't know that anybody really thought he was going to win in 2016. And so his team that he had together wasn't maybe up to the speed that they needed to be when he started. And then so many other things happened. So from the country standpoint, although I was very disappointed when Biden won in 2020, I think it's the best thing that ever happened to the country. He had time to reflect on it, think about it, and he has put together, I think, the best cabinet I've seen in my lifetime. And they are sharp. They know what they're doing. A couple of them I might not have picked, but overall, I would say it's fun to watch. And I think look, he hadn't even been in office 3 months this term,
Right.
and and nobody can keep up with what he's doing.
Yeah. Visiting with former U.S. Congressman Greg Harper. He represented the 3rd District in Mississippi. Let's go back to the China conversation that you brought up a second ago. And you said China has been at war with the United States, whether we recognize it or not, whether we know it or not. That's on a lot of different fronts, right? I mean, it's on the technology front, it's on the education front, it is on the building their infrastructure and their influence throughout the world front, but it's also theft, right? I mean, and intellectual property is at the top of the list. You make a product in the United States and you go through the patent process and you invest all that you need to invest, and you look up and 6 months later, sometimes even less, China has stolen that intellectual property, and they are creating it with underpaid labor at smaller cost and then distributing it around the world. Is there any way to combat that? Is that part of what's going on here?
Well, you certainly, there are a lot of things that you can try, but they take forever. How do you protect your property? Because sometimes if you decide you want to do business in that market with Communist China, they're going to get your stuff and they're going to have it. And so think of the money that Communist China saves, because they don't have to spend any money on research and development. Their R&D budget is nothing because they just steal it. And it's been going on forever. And it's not just the theft of intellectual property, which you can put in barriers, but if you go to, international courts, it takes years. And by that time, the damage is already done to your company. But no worse conduct that we can put a finger on than what they did during during the Wuhan virus. I'm sorry, COVID-19 virus. They denied that it was a lab leak. They covered it up. They knew this was going on months before the rest of the world did, and they bought up all the protective issues and items that
Hold
we
that,
needed.
yeah. Hold that thought just for a second. We'll come back to that and to the point that we were making a second ago. In some cases, the United States is funding some of the research and development that is happening in China. We're back with Congressman Greg Harper right after this. Continuing our conversation with Congressman Greg Harper. Former Congressman Greg Harper represented the 3rd District of the state of Mississippi. This is Mornings with Richard Cross on SuperTalk Mississippi. Glad to have you along. And a reminder, you can always join the conversation on the C Spire text line. If you're looking for game-changing technology, then you need C Spire on your team. 5G wireless, fiber home internet, and business IT solutions built as tough as you. Learn more at cspire.com. C Spire, inspired by you. Greg, we were talking about China and some of the things you were specifically talking about COVID and the Wuhan lab and all that went into that. And, it's funny. A lot of the things that many people were saying was going on, but elected officials were not willing to say publicly is now being said publicly with regard to the fact that, it wasn't a leak. It was intentional. Yes, we funded much of that gain-of-function research that was happening in the Wuhan lab. Yeah, the relationship with China really is a complicated one, and it feels like that complicated relationship right now is closer to coming to a head than at any point in the last couple of decades.
Oh, no doubt, and it's much more public. And China will, and I can't say China without saying communist China, because until their people are free, I'm just going to have to refer to them that way. But yeah, I mean, look, they're saying even yesterday, I can't even say their president, their emperor, their whatever he is. He has said, we're in it to the end, and so he's. It's definitely escalating. We have more cards than they have. They need our markets. Now, we may do without some things for a little while if it escalates far enough, and that could be a problem. But we have to look at this. We have we have the greatest country in the history of the world. I mean, hands down, not even close. But they and other communist countries have tried to utilize that openness that we have. Look no further than the research in our universities across the country. So many of those have been Chinese nationals that have come in and gotten access to information, much of what we don't know. And of course, we've also got the most visible part right now is probably the most important real estate in the country, which is in the whole world, is Taiwan. You look at that. You look at the fact that they have bought hundreds and hundreds of thousands of acres, many near military bases in our country. They are a real national security threat to us, and they cannot be trusted in their current form of government. Unlike probably the people, the regular citizens in China would probably love to live in something that we have, but it is a situation where Trump, I think, is prepared to do whatever. But if we can get all the other countries to the table on trade negotiations and issues, and do those things, whether it's the European Union, to wind up with real free trade and get Europe to pivot from buying oil from Russia and buy it from the United States, there are a lot of opportunities to win here and to prevail. But if you can do that and isolate just communist China, I think it puts us in a better situation.
I think what you point out there is fascinating, because in this conversation about tariffs, everybody's talking about trade and opening up markets and limiting what the United States is. Not so much a trade imbalance, because the United States has the buying power that most countries don't have, but at least a system that allows that to be closer to equal footing. But I think there are more layers to this than are really being talked about publicly. And you kind of allude to that a second ago when you talk about, where other countries are buying their energy, who they are aligning with. I mean, there's a story this morning that's out that talks about the fact that China is reaching out to others. It's almost like they're trying to rally support in the way that the United States has been doing with all the countries kind of lining up to say, hey, let's work out a deal.
Yeah, and look, remember, China's had a long history of doing the Belt and Road Initiative, where they've gone into smaller countries, whether it's in South America or Central America or other places in Asia, and they would say, "We'll build this road for you. We'll do these things for you, modernize you." But then it's a debt trap. They can't get out of that. But
Yeah,
their goal here is world domination. And thank goodness, look at what we've been able to do already on backing away control of the ports on the Panama Canal. I mean,
right.
so these are things that it's not just, it's like the old board game we used to play as kids, Risk, where it was the world domination. You try to take over the world.
Right.
There's no doubt that that's what their motivation is. And this is the first time we've really done a real look at, and I think it really is a great reset on where we are. So, and don't forget, China has been the main source of the fentanyl problem in this country, which has had a devastating effect on so many people and is still there. But look, who would have ever thought in the short period of time that Trump could have done what he's done on the border to turn that around?
I mean, it's gone to basically zero in terms of illegal crossings in the last 100 days. There is, to me, an issue that hits far closer to home because some of this can almost kind of feel abstract because it's what's happening in Washington D.C., it's what's happening in Beijing, it's what's happening on Wall Street, and yet we have this need sometimes to focus on, yeah, but what does it mean right here in Mississippi? And to me, the farmer, and I'm using that term very generally, is the group that you go to the top of the list of in terms of effect on them. China buys more of our grain than any other country in the world, and if China says we're not going to keep buying your soybeans or your cottonseed or whatever it is, that stands to hurt farmers in Mississippi, and we know that that's a very real struggle that already is going on with input prices compared to what they're getting in terms of sale prices. How concerning is that piece of this conversation for you?
Yeah, it's certainly very concerning. I'm one generation removed from the family farm in Lackey, Mississippi, outside Aberdeen,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a real issue. And I certainly appreciate the great job that Andy Gibson's done as our ag commissioner. And so, look, we trade with folks all over the world. We're a major trading partner on ag with Taiwan, for example, that we've mentioned several times today. So yes, it's a concern, but the fact that we went with the tariffs for just a minute, then now we've got a 90-day pause on that, and with China is the only one we're going after. Yes, there could be some temporary pain, but I think at the end of the day, our market options are so strong, whether it's in the country or whether it's international imports. I think our Mississippi farmers are probably the most patriotic people that we'll ever find, and so I think they're in it for the long haul, and we can't make it without them.
You said that we put those tariffs in place for a minute and have now backed off. I used the analogy earlier. It's like you've got a toolbox and there are tools in there, and you've got a problem that you need to fix, and you've got the tools to fix those problems. But if the tools just stay in the toolbox, the problem doesn't fix itself. Did Trump putting these in place only to back away from them for a negotiating window, was that the proof the rest of the world need that not only do they have the tools, but they are willing to use the tools to fix the problem?
Yeah, absolutely. And these tools will be painful to these other countries if they don't come to the table and negotiate. And look, at the end of the day, we're going to have much fairer trade than we've had in the past and a much more level playing field. I mean, I've got a lot of friends that they call themselves free traders. Well, you can't you can't be for free trade if one side's got the upper hand. And really, we have been infinitely more generous on these things and just kind of let them go. And it's certainly trade is critical for our state and our opportunities that are there. But we know, For Mississippi, was NAFTA a good thing? No, no, probably not.
Yeah.
And then the second worst thing that we probably did was letting China into the World Trade Organization. So these things, if you go back and look in that trade history over the 90s and beyond, uh, it's kind of put us in a situation that we're having to do this reset. And so, I mean, I'm so impressed with what the president's done and is doing on so many issues, and I certainly have a high level of trust that his folks know what they're doing.
Last thing for you, we've got a minute left. There have been some flashpoints in history where an opponent of the United States blinked, a communist opponent. We saw it with the Cuban Missile Crisis between JFK and Nikita Khrushchev. Russia in that moment in history blinked. Mikhail Gorbachev blinked to a certain degree when the Berlin Wall came down, and you heard Mr. Gorbachev tear down that wall. Will China blink this time?
I don't know, but they're going to probably be wide-eyed and lose some sleep over this, because what we're going to do is I think we'll probably have a better relationship with Russia on trade issues when this is said and done, and kind of break that Russia-China dating mode that they've been in for a little while. So at some point, China will realize they need us more than we need them. Even though we buy so many products from them, we can make it.
Thank you for your time. We're up against a break. Appreciate it so much.
Thanks, Richard. Good to talk to you. Thank you, buddy.